we can't even agree how much outside influences affect quarterback play, and you don't need to go any further than look at Brock Purdy, the discussion, the dynamic right now, right? We range all the way on the Brock Purdy discussion from he's MVP, look at the numbers, they speak for themselves, I don't need to see any more, to like, okay, this is the other end of the spectrum, and it is definitely the outlier, but like nobody I think is lower on Brock Purdy still than Stephen Ruiz from The Ringer, who does these quarterback rankings. Now, Stephen Ruiz in week 1 started off, Brock Purdy was 32nd in the NFL. He was the lowest ranked starting quarterback. I assume he just ranked 1 to 32. I haven't opened them. But he essentially said, worst starting quarterback in the league coming into the year. Now, over 5-6 weeks, he's upped that to the 22nd ranked. But the point being, like, MVP, 22nd ranked in the NFL. And the only difference here is how much influence is Kyle Shanahan, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, all of that having on this one dude. We can't agree. We don't know how much that is. So when you're looking at a guy in college, you don't even know how much of his performance is him and how much of it is everything else.
Yeah. And look, we wouldn't have that discussion. People aren't having that Brock Purdy's not really the MVP discussion because they don't like Brock Purdy or because he doesn't have a good arm. Like, nobody's doing it because he doesn't throw fast enough. I think they're really doing it because there's just other data available historically. We did this with Nick Foles years ago. Nick Foles, 2013,
right,
where he had 27 touchdowns and 2 picks in a 7-touchdown game. He stepped into a system where Chip Kelly was great for a year, and the NFL didn't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. And the PFF grade was about a 78, and the passer rating and the EPA and all of the production numbers, which are more driven by the team, were really high. And so to me, I was like, the PFF grade, I mean, I'm biased, but I know how the PFF grade works. And we have this history of saying a guy can have an 80 grade with MVP caliber stats. A guy can also have an 80 grade with average to below average stats. So clearly, and I believe we're the consistent ones there, right? I believe the grade is the consistent thing there. So there's just like the anti-Brock Purdy thing is people have seen this before. There's a history of Kyle Shanahan doing this. There's also a history of teams that have that level of playmaker making their quarterback stats look better. You have both in San Francisco, right? This is also the first year the Niners have been completely healthy at playmaker. I'm just calling it playmaker now, a tight end, receiver, and running back, and hybrids. And the other underrated part of stats that we don't look at enough, Sam, is sometimes we look at drop rate to defend a quarterback and say, oh man, he's making good throws, but his guys are dropping them. Where's drop rate for this year? I think Brock Purdy's receivers have dropped nothing. Do they even have any drops? That's not too bad. 4. That's not too bad. But just like not dropping passes, just catching the stuff that's there, also makes the stats look pretty good overall. So look, Brock Purdy 78 PFF grade I think is correct. I think that's good. He's elevating that offense. And he deserves a ton of credit for making that offense look better. The highest end Shanahan offense since 2016, the Matt Ryan year. Now it's a question of you're always trying to split up credit, and it's challenging.
Yeah, we've also, the shouty show world we live in, where the time span in everybody's brain, everybody has been reduced to having the brain of a goldfish, right? Except instead of 4 seconds or whatever the goldfish are supposed to remember, it's a week. You remember 1 week, and that's it. Then everything resets, and now you have new information, and your brain only goes back a week. So we've done this before, right? Baker Mayfield set rookie records for the Browns. Baker Mayfield rescued the Browns as a rookie. He was finally the answer. And then the Baker Mayfield thing stopped working, right? Because everything around him changed. It went up, it went down, it went everywhere. And now Baker Mayfield is like a journeyman who's sort of resuscitating his career in Tampa Bay. After, Carson Wentz was seen as the best quarterback in the NFL for a season and a half, entering his career. You can say injuries ruined him, but there were a lot of people saying this is unsustainably wild. It's not happening anyway. It's all built off crazy high leverage, 3rd and long plays. The grade never quite matched where Wentz's perception was, and even when it did, it was screaming regression at every point, right? 2017 Case Keenum. Was anybody coming out of that year going, Case Keenum's the truth? He's been miscast in every offense so far. I don't know why it took this long for Case Keenum to have a breakout year like this. We knew it was going to come back down to earth. Like, this has happened time after time after time. And yet, there's also examples of Josh Allen happened, right? 2 years worth of pretty crappy Josh Allen play, and people were saying, give it time, it's going to come good. And now Josh Allen has come good, and he's become this amazing player. So the Brock Purdy thing, the more important part in all this is not like how much is him, how much of it is everything else. It's that actually he's getting better, and whatever that percentage is, he's claiming a bigger piece of it in the last couple of weeks. And if that trend continues, like, that's scary for the rest of the NFL, because if Brock Purdy is actually able to overcome everything around him, if a team ever figures out answers for that, that's a problem for every other team in the NFL.
Oh, man, the game Sunday night, too, by the way, when we use the term upside, I pushed back on it for years until you saw the high upside guys actually hit, right? For years, we would say, why do you just say that the guy who throws the ball fast has upside? And then Josh Allen and Justin Herbert and Lamar and Mahomes and a lot of these guys started to hit their ceiling based off of tools. And it's like, okay, we've gone through this stretch. But I used to have this take that I've softened, that a guy like a Purdy, upside includes just working the system better. So Brock Purdy doesn't have arm talent upside, but it is fair to say he's run Shanahan's system great. And then you see the other night where he runs it even better. The anticipation. And anticipation is also upside as well, because you'll do it more often. And so it's a different type of upside that maybe Brock Purdy has right now, which I think is your point. Like, he's continuing to get better.
Not just that, but here's the extra layer of complication, as if it needed to be even more complicated, right? Number one, you've got the baseline of how much is him, what percentage. I always think of it as a pie chart, right? How much of the pie chart for credit for success is Brock Purdy, Kyle Shanahan, each individual receiver, the run game, the offensive line. There's like 7 things that get thrown in there. Each one of them has some portion of that pie, and we don't know how big it is, right? So that's like your starting point. How big a piece of that pie does Brock Purdy deserve versus Shanahan and everything else? Then you get this extra thing, which is where I think the Purdy dynamic is actually really interesting, is I think he is better in this offense than almost any other quarterback who benefits from a similar boost from Kyle Shanahan, because Shanahan's piece of that pie is pretty big. But what you don't understand, and there's just no way of measuring this, but is a thing, is what happens when Shanahan starts to change the way he behaves and the way he calls the game and the way he goes for certain situations or not, the way he addresses certain situations, because he has more faith in Brock Purdy than somebody else, right? And this is where, like, that's not just a Shanahan thing. That's not just a Purdy thing. That's a combination of both. And it's why I think that the combination of Purdy and Shanahan and everything else is actually more powerful than simply the 100% of that pie chart, right? It becomes 120% somewhere, because now Shanahan is looking at this and going, dude, Brock Purdy's different. On 3rd and 20, I'm going to call a play that might actually work rather than just dumping it off on a screen, because I know Jimmy can't make that play happen.
That's the funny thing about it, right? Because the Garoppolo thing is absolutely true, right? So Garoppolo's baseline PFF grade was 71 to 78, right? Purdy's now going to surpass that, which is what you see on film. But Garoppolo also had the EPAs, right? The EPA people, the people who might lean into EPA a little bit too much, who are now in assigning it to quarterbacks and be like, wow, Jimmy Garoppolo's underrated. And they're just starting to come around, I think, to, oh, by the way, it might be Shanahan. It might be the open throws. It might be the playmakers. It might be the 3rd and 15 screens that become first downs. But there were people who were like, have you seen Jimmy Garoppolo's career stats? Have you seen it? We should be talking about Jimmy Garoppolo more. I mean, so that's the conflict there. We all watched Jimmy Garoppolo play on a Sunday night football game where he threw the ball to the defense 2 or 3 times and then came out of that season 4th in EPA per play. That's why Brock Purdy's not getting credit. We all watched Jimmy Garoppolo, scratched our head 2 or 3 times per game, and still saw him lead the league in yards per attempt, right? That's why Brock Purdy's not getting credit, because the guy that Shanahan wanted to move on from was putting up otherworldly numbers for the level of play. Brock Purdy has upped that level of play and upped those level of the numbers, but it's still in the back of our head that Kyle Shanahan has Nick Mullins in the record book for the most yards in a 16-game sample to start a career, has Jimmy Garoppolo having the EPA's, screaming about how underrated he is. That's what Brock Purdy's up against when you're trying to figure out the difference of credit in the pie.
And the thing is, in one sense, it doesn't matter. Like, in the sense of, can the 49ers win a Super Bowl?
Oh, that doesn't matter at all. No.
Like, if you're defending them, none of that matters. Right?
It only matters when you're trying to figure out the credit.
Yes.
Which is what we all do on these shows.
So it's trying to evaluate how good is Brock Purdy when it matters. And then the other time it matters is when you're saying who is the most valuable player in the NFL, right? Because it isn't Brock Purdy, right? Unless you get back to that complicating factor of, well, does he become the most valuable player in the NFL because he actually supercharges Kyle Shanahan's coaching mind, right? Like the fact that Shanahan has Brock Purdy and has the confidence in Brock Purdy that he may never have had with another quarterback, right? Or maybe Matt Ryan. Like, he's calling a game differently now. And that is the superpower. It's the fact that the best coaching mind in the NFL, or one of the top three, is now like he's on Adderall, right? Having Brock Purdy essentially puts Kyle Shanahan on Adderall, and he's like, well, like the sort of beautiful mind, gifts where like it's all coming. The super mind is being unlocked by Brock Purdy. If you're making a case for his MVP candidacy, that's what it is. It's not that he's better than everybody else, because he isn't.